Hi there. Well, it's been a very long and productive week, and I'm feeling very unproductive at the moment. So I've poured myself a little vumo here, and I'm gonna do some world building and a little bit of drinking. Hopefully that won't interrupt it, but I feel like I've earned it. Put the book out. I put out I'm working on a new draft for the screenplay from the director who has to have things done right away, and yeah. And so I have some things I need to do. I really need to pick a winner, but right now I just feel like being unproductive, and I'm going to do some world building because it's kind of fun. We talked about fantasy functions this week, which I then found out after I made that video that was the first video I also had ever made was about fantasy functions. This most recent one is that's probably in the notes here is much better, and I highly recommend that one instead. So I realized how much fantasy functions, that's what I do every week when I build a new world. The building up process is really like coming up with the fantasy conceits, seeing how they all work together, and the building out is then plugging all the analog cultures and stuff through that. It's a little bit more than that, but that's kind of the basic thing that I'm going to do. But I have said before the analog cultures, I used 2 analog cultures last week when I made the samurai ogres and the bug riding gauchos. But you can also use 2 different time periods, which is what I'm going to do today. So I am going to grab some things, and then I'm going to plug 2 different time periods of the same culture through it and see what the results are. I'm doing this kind of because when you write a sequel in a world, a lot of things that you do, Wolf talks about this, is that you make your sequel either occur in the same, when you're reusing the same world, either occur in a different part of the world, so part of it is still new, you see how new cultures carry out the fantasy conceits, or you do it much, much later, and then so you see how time has changed the world itself. So you still get to use the same conceits, but you still make it seem new to the audience by either adding a new location or a new time period. So today, since we did 2 different cultures last time, we're going to do 2 different time periods. So let's see what we're going to get. Also, I put out I just uploaded my audiobook today, so that was some more productivity there. All right, so we are getting a moving desert, early adoption muskets, merpeople. Oh, it's gonna be fun. Should we go for one more? Merpeople in a moving desert, and elephants. That's from this one thing. Powers derived for consumption. All right, that means we're gonna have a magical system that involves powers derived from consumption. All right, this is gonna be kind of fun. I think what I'm gonna do this time is take, since everything's always European, I'm going to take the American colonial period, which would be pre-gas lamp probably. I'll have to think about it some more, and then do a modern version of it too. So I'm going to figure out these fantasy conceits real quick, put them together, build up with it, and then see what I can do. See you in a bit. So I'm 10-15 minutes in. I really gotta start remembering to write it down. Second drink. That's much better. I put too much sugar in it last time. Anyways, so we have our new world, and it's quite literally going to be a new world because we're taking from, like I said, I'm going to go with colonial United States, but I think we're going to go a little earlier. The world is now affecting the story, which affects the characters, how it goes. So anyways, we're going to change the story concept and the analog cultures to make this a first contact story because that's what we kind of need. But we're in the building up stage still. We're trying to figure out why we have this moving desert that and also involves merpeople, not at all diametrically opposed. Technology of early adoption from muskets, which is interesting because people often argue that cultures that live underwater would have no access to, well, certainly not technology like chemistry for gunpowder or fire. Yeah, so how are we going to square that one? And then finally, that their magic involves consuming people to gain their power, consuming something to gain its power, which I might have to put back in the bucket because that's a really good one. I don't get to use it this one because I don't have a magic system. So we got to use a lot of antecedents in this one. For instance, why is there a moving desert? And then how is it they're eating people for information, or it didn't have to be people actually, it could have been anything, but my mind went to eating people probably because there was cannibalism a few weeks ago in one of them. Anyways, so we started with what was the moving desert, what caused this moving desert. It's the geography, which is going to influence the biology, which is the merfolk, which is, technology is further down, and then even though I have consuming people at the end for the magic system, it's because I didn't know where to put it, and we're going to get into that, into the biology. Long the short of it, I applied some antecedents, why is there a moving desert, and I came to the conclusion there was a god at one point, and then it cursed the people of this land because they killed his children, her children, whatever. We'll have to design a system for that. As such, it created this terrible sentient desert that is hunting the people. So no matter where they went, the desert would hunt them. So as such, it would affect the biology, which means, and the technology and such, so they could never become not civilized, but they could never put down roots. They could never, plant a forest, plant a farm, because the desert's going to get them if they do. So they scattered, and are now nomadic people because of it. Some of them, they're shamans, they're magic users, decided that they were sick of running all the time and decided to put down roots by, we're going to say there's a very large lake system, fed by the rivers, and decided to turn themselves into merfolk. It's only the shaman, so that's kind of their magic system. It's going to be a very soft magic system where they can obviously change things like their biology and turn themselves into merfolk. And so there are two types of people on this continent. There are those of the merfolk who live in all the oceans, all the rivers and the water systems to get away from the living desert, which can never dry up all the water no matter what it wants to do, or if it does go to one area, they just migrate. They're considered cousins of the humans of this land, and we're going to use analog cultures from Native Americans for that, because, I'll get to that because I was using America. So that's kind of the world that we're at. One of the powers of the merfolk is that they can gain the knowledge, literally the knowledge and power of something if they eat it, which is probably what they ate the children of the god in the first place, which is what caused this desert. So the land people who were not good enough to become merfolk live nomadic lives. They are still going around, running around everywhere to avoid the desert, which is only one desert. So when it comes, you have to scatter. So it doesn't matter how long you lived there. It could have been 20 years. You pack up and leave because the desert's here, and it's going to kill us. So that's our starting point. We still had early adoption because this is America, and we're using Native American analogs. Of course, we should have some colonial coming in. So this is going to be a first contact story where we have our early adopters. We're going to say it's England analog. Yeah, if I had more time, I would probably say Dutch or something more fun. But English, just because I can do that faster, and they have more of a history in America. As such, the idea is that they came across muskets long before everyone else in the analog Europe. So they quickly conquered everyone with their muskets, just blew everyone away, took over all of Europe. So when it came time to, they're the new Rome, kind of, but with muskets. Magic exists in this world, but it's not. It's very soft magic, like I said, and they kind of extinguish it with technology. And they are now expanding, and they've come across this new continent where they have moving deserts and merfolk and Native American analogs. So this first story is going to be first contact story. I'm going to tell it from I would tell it from two perspectives. One from a native who is one of the land-dwelling natives, and they kind of have to worship their cousins, not worship them, but they have to pay tribute to them because they're the ones who are the repository of all knowledge. Two POVs. One of them, it would be from the invaders, such as it was the first contact. I would not make him a bad man because I would want to write tragedies, so he's actually a good man who just wants to, he wants to settle this area, but there's that roaming desert, so he's actually talking to the natives to figure out what's going on. The natives, I would tell the other POV would be from one of their sides, like a chieftain. I hate using that word, but anyways, someone with a lot of prestige in that culture who is dealing with them. They can speak kind of a pidgin, and the natives are thinking, well, we can get out from under the thumb of the magic users, the merfolk. We can maybe use this wonderful technology these guys have, and so at first it looks like they're being friends. The natives are trying to get out from under the thumb of the merfolk, and then terrible misunderstanding happens. The guns get turned on them. They get not wiped out, but massacre. And eventually they realize that they can't fight these invaders because they have the weapons. So the story would become then stealing the muskets, or stealing a person, probably since it's a tragedy, the guy whose perspective, who's actually a pretty good guy who's leading it, they would probably steal him, bring him to the merfolk so the merfolk can eat him and learn the magic of technology, and then to arm them. I haven't figured out how to bring the moving desert into it, but it would obviously have to be there for the climax. So that's the first half of this. That's my using, again, American analog from First Contact. So that's what, 1600s, kind of that area, colonial times. And so yeah. Anyways, bare bones story. Now we're going to stop. I'm going to develop a little bit more with what it's going to be like in modern times. So now we're going to jump forward a couple hundred years to see how this culture has adapted. I'll see you in a little bit. So here we go. I think 30 minutes total. Really gotta start writing this down. Anyways, so now we're coming back to our sequel storyline, which is many years later. This analog, I originally wanted to do 1990s because that's when I grew up, so I thought it'd be fun to try to do Gen X, grunge kind of thing, and I started doing the world, and mainly because I wanted Gen X and environmentalism, which is kind of Captain Planet. I think that Rick and Morty episode where they made fun of Captain Planet made me think about it again. So anyways, so there was the whole environmentalism thing, which I thought that would work really well with the whole idea of trying to destroy the desert, which is one of our world building details. And so I guess I should kind of back up. I was thinking about, after the fact, this is one of the last things I came up with, actually, toe hole details. So the toe hole detail is to let people know what is the analog culture or time period you're using. I wrote down just a couple of them for this one. Anyways, back up again. I decided midway through the story that 1990s isn't nearly as much fun as 1980s, hence everything being 1980s right now. I lived there, it was not great. But that's really popular right now, so it'd be dumb not to do the 1980s. So my 1990s became 1980s, and then some of my toe hole details involved the stupid fashion, music, the idea of greed, and then I was thinking about how Mad Max post-apocalypse stories were really popular at the time, and then also how the Cold War was going on. So those will become two of our toe hole details that we will, through our fantasy function, to come up with this world. Second one. Very good drink, by the way. Vumo. I think it's French, so it's Vumot, Voque, Mock, whatever. Anyways, so our world, now many hundred years later, things have changed significantly. The whole idea was there was that war between the natives and the UK equivalents, and they ended up eating one of the main characters from one of the main POVs from the UK explorer / conqueror, and to gain the knowledge of muskets. They used that knowledge of muskets to drive them away. So many hundred years later, that UK equivalent from their equivalent of Europe has become the equivalent of Soviet Russia, as in they have taken over everything. They were the first, most powerful. They had muskets, and they have taken over that entire continent. They've taken over a lot of the world and exported their ideas. And but the one they couldn't ever get was this continent right here, and that was because of the moving desert. The same reason that the natives couldn't ever get it was because that moving desert means, there's a lot of resources there, but you can't really get them for very long because then the desert will come after you. Meanwhile, so they set up a colony on some of the islands out, not far from it, and they keep resupplying these islands, and they come in and they kind of raid. They try to get some of the resources. Eventually, they couldn't raid for very long because every time they'd raid, the natives would grab someone and eat them and gain their knowledge. So very quickly they climb the tech tree using the merfolk. So the merfolk become even more prized because they can figure out technology, but they can't work the technology because they live in the water, so no chemistry, no fire, none of that kind of thing. So there's a now second class of technicians, I guess you could say. So the merfolk keep the knowledge that they get from eating the UK equivalent, the Russian UK equivalents, and then they have the tech people who build the stuff. And anyways, and then the UK people have a colony outside of that. So my idea is that right along the coast, there is a area of trade. They're officially enemies, but there's détente, so there is some mixing along the coast. Thing is, you never send someone in with a lot of knowledge because they're going to get snatched up and eaten. And then that knowledge goes to them. But the natives also can't build the factories and that kind of thing, so they may have all the knowledge, but their knowledge is very short-lived. So you build a factory, you build what you can, the desert comes along and wipes it out. So yeah, that's still making it very... So back to the toehold details. I get to do a very kind of Mad Max kind of thing. So even though they have pieces of culture and some of it, they can't ever keep it for long. So everyone's kind of scattered and put together and still moving, and it's still kind of post-apocalypse, even though they have a lot of good technology and the rest of the world is doing pretty well. So let me see. You have trade cities. The merfolk are even more powerful. They kidnap and eat everyone. Right. So as such, the UK people compartmentalize, which is a hard word for me to say even when I'm sober, compartmentalize everything, and so do the natives, the merfolk, compartmentalize all their stuff. So anyways, our story would begin where finally one of the UK scientists is like, I have figured out how to destroy the desert. I've got it. We have a team, and we all have part of the knowledge that we think that can destroy this desert, and we're going to come and we're going to trade for a large portion of your land, if that's the case. And so that's kind of the story starts. The story we're going to do kind of Stranger Things, because obviously you want kids, not like kids, but younger, because it's the 80s was better story for all the John Hughes movies, that kind of thing. So you're going to have a John Hughes cast of probably technicians who are working with the merfolk, but don't have the knowledge, they just have the ability. And so the scientists come in, but it was a trap. The merfolk end up eating everyone except for one scientist who gets away. And that scientist meets up with their teenage kids, except they're probably college, whatever, the technicians. And, so then we get to do the fashion filtered through Native American, filtered through all these conceits kind of thing, with an 80s theme with the scientist, because we don't want an environmental theme because it's the 1980s, and that's where that started. Unfortunately, didn't finish then because we're still dealing with that stuff. God knows how many years later. Originally it's the team of technician outcasts decide to get this one scientist who has the last key bit of information. So the merfolk don't have everything they need. They need that one last person, and they're going to try to smuggle him out, whatever. And but midway through, they realize one of the merfolk rebels, let's say, who's eaten some of all this and has all the rest of the knowledge. So now they're going to decide this is the time to take a stand. We're going to destroy that desert. The rebel merfolk can travel on the water. The rest of them have to travel. So you get your cross-continental whatever to go face the sentient desert with the merfolk, a scientist from the UK / Russia, Cold War Russia, and a bunch of Native American technicians with 80s flair and crimped hair, because that would be fun. So anyways, there you go. That's a fantasy function. I built the fantasy conceit from the random things in my building up phase. Then I took the same culture, two time periods, filtered it through that fantasy conceit. The cool thing about through the fantasy function. The cool thing about fantasy functions is that they are consistent, which is one of the 4 C's of world building. And that means that, whatever you do to it, you apply it equally to everything you feed through it. So it's consistent, the audiences can get it, they can get a handle on it. It's not like magical realism where and then this happened, whatever. Magic realism, I love it, but it's not consistent at all, so it's not fantasy world building. Fantasy world building is consistent in that regard, so all the fantasy conceits are consistent. You say, this is what it is about the world, and it will always be that, no matter what data you feed through it, and whatever output detail will reflect that. So that's what I did. 2 time periods, many hundred years difference. That's a fantasy conceit. I hope you can use it to build better worlds.